So anyway, before I start, let me tell you who I am. My name's Andy Cheetham, and I'm the MD of a company called Lime Licensing Group. And we've been going for 11 years as Lime, although as individuals, our franchising background stretched back to 1993, so we've been going for quite a long time. And essentially, we create franchise systems in the UK and North America. We've advised well over 100 brands in the UK, recruited something over 2,000 franchisees. We've stopped counting now, but the royalty and revenues generated from those is well over 100 million now. And over the years, we've been an integral part of many market-leading brands with multi-million pound valuations, so we know our stuff. So let's get started. So these aren't in any particular order, but I've tried to put them in a bit of a logical sequence. And the place that we always start with is about brand ownership. If you think about it, it follows that if you want to license others to use your brand, you should, if at all possible, own the brand in question. So if you later find out that you've granted the rights to someone else's brand, for example, then you and potentially the franchisees may be in a litigious position. And the only way you can own your brand is by owning a registered trademark. Now, you can do it yourself. Actually, it's not too difficult. Go on to ipo.gov.uk, or you can use a professional advisor like us, or people who specialize in trademarks and patents and things like that. It's not particularly expensive either, but it's certainly the first step. And actually, even if you're not going to be a franchisor, you want to really own your trademark anyway. On from there is NDA, non-disclosure agreements. We really preach this a lot. If you want to discuss your plans as a new franchisor with anybody at all, then if it's got the word franchise on it, have them sign a confidentiality agreement. If you knew what I knew, you'd definitely do that. And I'd like to encourage you to have a little state of paranoia about anyone who you discuss franchising with until you've launched. So that's the first thing. Now, before you set about franchising your business and parting people with their life savings, this is a classic error. We see a lot of brands who enter the franchise industry who haven't really put enough into a pilot scheme or a test. Now, the franchise industry deals with this inconvenient issue by getting proper evidence that the business can be replicated by running a test franchise. And sometimes they're called a pilot scheme or a pilot franchise, a template franchise. They're all the same thing. But what you're looking for is proof that an inexperienced operator can replicate the business in another location. And so run a test and consider these points before you crack on, because there are easy mistakes to make. So firstly, is this pilot going to be managed or run by a third party? Both work, actually, but a genuine third party is closest to that what a new franchisee is going to do, because they're not already in the company or they're not closely associated with you. But if you already have multiple locations or territories, then there's a chance, actually, you might not need to run pilot anyway. Now, you probably already know everything a franchisee needs, and provided you can demonstrate that, then the business can be replicated, and we can usually take that experience as representative as a pilot already being run. So depending on the circumstances, maybe that was set up a completely independent third party, or if actually your experience is so close to a pilot anyway, we'll just crack on. Now, not overly assisted is something that we always look for, because if the franchisees are going to be sole traders, but for example, the pilot has had a team of 4 people, I mean, we've seen some pilots that are independently owned businesses, but they've had a whole call center helping them. So it needs to be representative, obviously not overly assisted. The franchisee's got to stand on their own 2 feet, and so has the pilot. So if it took a team of 4 to get the franchise profitable, then obviously the franchisee who's going to be on their own is going to struggle. So not overly assisted is something that we always look for. And then the same restrictions too. So for example, if currently you're dealing with all and sundry all around the UK, but you want franchisees to manage small regions or a town like Doncaster or something, then the pilot needs to be restricted to a similar demographic to have any credibility. And so that's another thing to look for. And bear in mind as well that your pilot, you're probably not going to charge yourself a royalty if you are running it yourself. So net profit will be different to a franchisee's, because there needs to be room for a royalty. So when you do your sums, just be mindful of that. And the same also applies to supplier prices, and if they can be extended to the franchisees at the same rate that you are paying. Because if they can't, then that's going to affect the net profit of a franchisee. So these are other things to look for. And finally, if you talk to a lot of people or even do research online about running a pilot scheme, a lot will say a pilot scheme has to be run for 12 months. Some even say 2 years. Now, if you just think about that for a moment, now how can it be that every single sector of the economy has to have exactly the same period of time under pilot conditions? It's utter rubbish, really. So please use the line that I use as your guidance here, and that is that your pilot needs to be run for whatever period of time allows you to look someone in the eye and say, if you do A, B, and C, you'll get X, Y, and Z. And once you reach that point, you're good to go. Now, if you followed the often cited 12-month advice, it may well be that myself and my team may have hooked up with one of your competitors 3 months later while you're still plodding along, ticking down 2 years. You won't have even got to Christmas and we'll have launched a competing franchise. And if your business is that good and you know it's now working and you can look a franchisee in the eye and tell them under certain circumstances they'll get a certain outcome, you don't have time to waste running an extended pilot unless it's not proven and profitable. So once it's at that point and you can prove it works, get on with it because someone else will if it's a good franchise. The franchise industry is extremely entrepreneurial. We don't have time to waste. Okay, so thirdly, we spend a lot of time on this part actually. A lot of new franchisors aren't fully aware of the competition that they're going to have. Now, the franchise industry is a pretty sophisticated place for the most part. So you need to know how you stack up about everything else that one of your potential franchisees is going to look at. Myself and my colleagues at Lime have quite an in-depth knowledge of most franchise systems. But these are the typical things that a new franchisor should be looking for. So you need to know about brands that are in the same market. So in simple terms, if you're a fishmonger franchisor, for example, then find the others and see what they're doing. Characteristics, if you're a low-cost part-time work-from-home business, then consider what other franchisors are doing who also have those characteristics. Because a potential franchisee isn't necessarily just going to look at one particular sector. They're going to look at things that have the same characteristics. Similarly, price range, a bit like buying a house, and many franchisees have whatever they have to spend, but then they'll find what's available around that budget. So do the same thing and just marvel at the choices that they've got other than your own. But you need to be aware of what those choices are. Now, with all of those things in mind, what is your USP? You ought to have one, really. And you won't know what it is without good competitor awareness. One thing's for sure, once you kick off as a franchisor, you'll get to know everyone else who's competing with you. And really the time to be doing it is now, not down the line. Because if anything needs to change, then you want to change it before you kick off, really. Now, this is quite a big topic I'm going to come to now. And this is a mistake we see a lot. It's called not fully understanding the rights granted. So there's a legal terminology, but essentially there are 5 or 6 key things to decide upon here. And I'll try and elaborate on that now. So a multi-brand business may well have a shared parent company, for example. Do not grant the franchise rights to the parent, grant it to the individual brand that's within the group. If the parent company grants the franchise agreement, doesn't get the terminology right in the agreement, then the franchisee's got the right to everything in the group. So that needs narrowing. Similarly with multi-sector brands, a good example of that potential, let's say BMW, automotive brand, as you know, they'll have dealerships for cars, but also dealerships for bikes. And you want to be limiting the rights granted to the bike or the car sector and not to the entirety of BMW. Increasingly, there are a number of different ways that online and offline sales can be dealt with. So as an example, imagine for a moment I own Andy's beauty salon. I did actually own one once, so looking at me, it's not as far-fetched as you might think. But my franchisees, let's say, get walk-in customers, and that's pretty easy to understand. But then I'll launch my own range of products, and one of the franchisees' customers, for example, buys online from head office. our warehouse is 200 miles away. Who gets the sale? Or who gets what portion of that sale? You're going to need a policy for that, aren't you? And that comes under the topic of what's of the rights granted to. Now, when you do this, it actually gives the potential for more than one network. By carefully considering those rights, you've got the potential for maybe numerous franchise networks. It also means as well that you're offering franchisees the potential to scale up and buy a second franchise. So, but they must truly scale up and have the cash and people on board to do it justice, obviously. And what you don't want is a franchisee buying a second franchise and then actually just spreading themselves 50% of the time and one at 50% of the other. But by getting this area right, you're really mitigating the risk for yourself as a franchisor, but also for the potential franchisees. For example, let's say a BMW car dealership, again, let's say in Southampton, has the franchisee drop dead. It's likely that the nearby bike franchisee can at least steady the ship until a new franchisee is found. So by having the rights granted and having potentially the option to have 2 or 3 franchise networks together, it's actually protecting the franchisee's brand reputation, if you like, as well as the franchisor. So it's well worth putting a lot of time thinking into this. Okay, so on to a topic we are always asked this one, and this is about territories. There's no end of mistakes we have come across with territories. It all comes down to actually maybe not knowing what you don't know, but also maybe not fully considering the following points I'm going to run through now. Of course, you've got an option anyway to have no territory, and that basically gives the choice to the franchisee that follows and not the franchisee that joined first. So if a franchisee, for example, joins in, let's say, Solihull, and the next franchisee might want to open in Walsall. The Solihull franchisee might not be very happy. The Walsall franchisee might not care that the Solihull guy's close by. And it can work, but you can see the problem of franchisees competing with each other, can't you, when there's no territory? And there's ways to manage it, but you do get a bit of chaos sometimes with things like that. Very common in the franchise industry is data territory, where data is a good way to create territories for a lot of franchisors. So each franchisee, for example, then would have a region of X thousand people or households defined by postcodes, and that really should be linked to the pilot results, because the pilot results in many ways will actually restrict a franchisee's income. So depending on how big or how small a territory, depending on how big or how small they can scale the business. So the database territories do work quite well for a lot of brands, particularly things like mobile formats, because they encapsulate a big enough territory to replicate the franchise. And it doesn't matter then really if 2 franchisees even live next door to each other, because one will head east and one will head west. They've both got separate areas. They can coexist together really quite easily. The problem with this, however, is in things like resale format, where there's a decision as to who deals with who is made. It's made by the consumer, not by the franchisee. So a better solution for retail format would be based on distance. And distance is often used as a territory definition. It does suit retailers quite well, fixed location businesses. So distance doesn't work well with mobile formats. For example, sales agency style franchises where an as the crow flies radius is usually a circle, obviously, and circles don't meet up, so you end up with bits of land that don't belong to anybody. Or whereas retail formats, distance works pretty well because it's the consumer who chooses who to deal with, not franchisee. So the big question here with distance is how close is too close before they start robbing sales off each other. And this is exactly the type of analysis that my colleagues and I at Land Licensing Group carry out for franchisors. And it's really quite critical to get this decision right. Another potential option under territories is market sector. And in some cases, market sector works fine. That might be, for example, like a recruitment consultancy granting franchise rights for the legal sector, another one for automotive sector, another one for retail, for example. If the rights granted were for the whole brand, then that could end up being one heck of a costly decision. You'd have half as many franchisees and half the revenue cover as a result. You can also actually define territories on product and service category. So a little bit like the rights granted, this is where these things overlap. But the first franchise brand I was ever involved with was our family business, and we were retail suppliers. We had 3 product ranges, which was cards, sweets, and CDs and DVDs. But we actually had different franchisees covering the same area, but for each different product. So in some cases, one shop would get 3 different franchisees visiting each shop with a different product range. Simply that one did cards, one did DVDs, and one did sweets. So there's always the potential to do this with a lot of multi-product or multi-service businesses. And of course, you can have a hybrid, and that is a very long topic and certainly one for another day that we won't have time to cover today. But the implications of getting a territory decision right are really huge. If later on it could be found that an extra 20 franchisees could have been accommodated, then that could be a £1 million mistake. And the reason I say £1 million mistake is because that is exactly what I calculated with a franchisor who contacted Line Licensing just before the lockdown. They were struggling. They didn't seem to be getting quite where they wanted to be. We sat down, we went through an exercise not too dissimilar to these headed points, and we calculated that they've lost £1 million in revenue by getting the territory decision wrong. So, whatever you pay a good franchise consultant, it's usually money well spent. Okay, so mistake number 6. I probably don't need to elaborate on this, but not saying no enough. You're a new franchisor, you've got to put money down to get all the consultancy done, everything set up, pay lawyers for franchise agreements and mapping companies to get mapping done potentially. There's all sorts of costs. But don't ever be seduced by the franchise fee that someone can pay you. A bad apple ruins the barrel. We're all just one click away from thousands of people knowing what a jerk you've been. So the wrong franchisee upsets other franchisees, your staff, your suppliers. You might even bring the whole brand into disrepute. So follow your good instinct. And if it just doesn't feel right, wait for the right franchisee to come along. Because if you've got a good franchise, they will come along later. Nobody should just be able to rock up and buy a franchise. If you've got a good franchise brand, you won't be defined by one more sale. So you're in a long game anyway. So we would always advocate just be patient and don't be afraid of saying no if that franchisee hasn't got the right skill set or even you just don't get along with each other. You don't have to sell a franchise to anybody. Now, this is an interesting point I want to make now about network optimization. And please write this phrase down that I'm going to say to you now. If you're a new franchisor, it's a classic mistake. If you write this down, stick it on your office wall and look at it every day, you probably won't be over-egging it really. So this is what we would preach at Lime always. Now, the first franchisees buy on potential. All the rest buy on reality. Okay, so the first franchisees buy on potential, all the rest buy on reality. What that really means is if you're ever going to over-deliver, you do it to the first group of franchisees. Back them, help them, drag them along if you need to, because once they are trading and a prospective franchisee rings them, they'll provide the endorsement that you need to grow the network. So just do everything you can possibly do to get that first group rocking and rolling. And then try and keep that habit with everyone else. But if there's ever a good argument for over-delivering, don't do it when your franchisees are struggling. Do it right away. The minute the first franchisee lands, do everything you can. Now, I promised you something free at the beginning. And when we work with a new franchise brand, we take them along and what we call our elite franchise blueprint. And the first day of that is quite a costly process. We spend a few days preparing, we spend time with the client, and it's easily a grand's worth of consultancy work because we'll explore everything about the feasibility of the whole thing. It's a fairly steady fact in our business that 50% of the franchisors who contact us, we tell them not to proceed for various reasons. But we'll go through the whole feasibility. We'll put an NDA policy in place, a non-disclosure agreement policy in place, including providing agreements for it. carry out a whole IP review and protect all the intellectual property that needs to be protecting. It really is a free lunch. And while we're at it, we'll answer as much questions as we can to go about how you can franchise your business. So if you head over to lionlicensinggroup.co.uk, there's a little screen grab there. There's a big red button. Click on that button, grab yourself a free lunch. Now, I can't offer it to everybody because there will be a point, I'm sure, where we need to be mindful of our own capacity. But it's a significant value. If you're a new franchisor, we'll guide you in far more detail than I have done just now. It's a huge freebie, but we'll pull the form once we run out of capacity. So if you want it, go and grab it. Now, finally, franchising, we always say easy to get right, easy to get wrong. And that's why you need a franchise consultant. So I hope if you're at the beginning of your journey of franchising, you've picked up a few things that might help you there. And I'm around for another 5 or so minutes now. I'll just stop the share. And if anybody has any questions or want anything I can elaborate on, then please just put a question in the chat box or contact me while we're on there. I'll put a link to our website in here, and then if anybody wants to click on it, they can grab that free one. Now, Angie, I know that you're there. Angie's sort of officiating this, but I actually can't hear anybody. If anybody's muted, then if Angie, you could unmute them, then they can ask any questions.
Hi, Andy. Everyone's on mute, so I can unmute everyone, but it might be a bit hectic.
I suppose they could use the chat facility, couldn't they?
Yeah, if that's okay with you.
It's a bit new for everybody, this, so this is only the second one that the organisers have done. So.
Also, we do have a question that's come through.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that, Andy, but it says, how do you price your franchise?
Yeah, it's a good question, and what we tend to do is when we set up a new franchise system, we sort of go through a 6 to 8 week process, and when it comes to pricing the actual franchise, you are guided a little bit by the competition you've got in the market. So, for example, that second area when I talked about knowing the other brands, not just the brands you'll directly compete with, but those who've got similar characteristics as well. If you're a bit late to the party and there's already another 30 very broadly similar brands, the die may have been cast a little bit for you and where your investment needs to be. And so when we come to recommending franchise fees, we are always doing it after we've carried out that exercise. Because if you're going to stick out, you need to stick out for a good reason, not for an expensive one. So it's not a very easy question to ask, but as some simple pointers, you need to, if you're a new franchisor, certainly identify what the inventory that a franchisee is going to need and what that costs. The difficult one always is identifying what it's going to cost to get that franchisee to a point where they're self-sufficient. And that's usually management time as well as maybe some supplier time or people within your own company. You may as well start identifying what all that costs and have a bit of a stab at how much your time is going to cost to get them to a point where they truly can stand on their own 2 feet. And put that along with the competitor analysis, and it will give you a good guideline as to where you should be.
Andy, there's also a couple of messages in the chat. I don't know if you can see those ones.
Yes, I can see one now. So this is from Amy. You mentioned extra cost of royalty with proving the concept. Can you explain a bit more about that? Yes. So if you're testing the system now, you're running a pilot scheme or a test of any description. Let's say you're actually managing that yourself, and you come up with, for argument's sake, a net profit, and that net profit is only 10%. Well, remember, a franchisee is going to be paying a royalty to you, and if that royalty is 10%, then they're not going to make any money, are they? So whatever profit your pilot makes, remember to add in that a franchisee is also going to pay a royalty, because the inherent deal in all franchising is that in exchange for the franchise fee, the business gets launched, and in exchange for the royalty, the franchisees get supported, and of course you have the rights to operate the brand. So it's just factoring in that you running the pilot yourself, you're not going to charge yourself a royalty, but a franchisee who joins is going to pay a royalty, and so you need to factor that in. How can you, another question I'm reading now, how can you assess what a fair price for a franchise is? That goes back to competitor analysis again. If you're first into the market, it's a wonderful position, but you'll still look at the characteristics of that business against other ones. So that again just comes down to good knowledge of the industry straight away. We spend a lot of our time carrying out significant amounts of surveying and fact finding for our new clients, so that they know the basis on which we're making these decisions is based on sound knowledge of the franchise industry. There's another question I'm reading now. If as a franchisor you charge a percentage on sales, how do you make sure that you get the correct sales figure? Yes, well, that's a good one. Yeah, and I think that's becoming less of an issue now. It was a time when obviously a lot of franchises, particularly B2C models where cash was being paid, if your royalty was purely based on declared sales, then it's right for a bit of abuse there, isn't it? But more increasingly these days, everything's a bit more accountable. With shared CRM systems for franchisees and franchisors, that details things. But you know, to a degree, you've always got a slight trust judgment to make with your franchisees. We know some franchisors who are almost like a police force or auditing all the time. It's not quite my style, that, but there is sometimes an argument for it. But I would think if you recruit the right franchisees to start with, hopefully those problems will be minimized. I speak to some franchisors who say they assume there's always going to be a certain amount of under-declared. But of course, it depends how you get your royalty. If you're just getting your royalty on a percentage of sales, then I suppose that's something to think about and mitigate. But in many cases, franchisors get their royalty through product margin as well as fixed fees. So if there's something peculiar about your business, which means that royalty could very easily be underdeclared, maybe the thing to do is to look at analysis that carries a fixed fee, and that's one way around it, certainly.